The first thing I found in my grandfather's locked room was a photograph of myself. That wouldn't sound so weird if the photograph hadn't been taken 12 years before I was born. I remember standing there in the middle of that dusty room, holding the picture with both hands, staring at a little boy who looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same crooked smile, even the same tiny scar above the eyebrow. I was 31 years old at the time, and I had just inherited my grandfather's house. Today, that house is worth more than $4 million. The property, the land, the businesses connected to it, everything combined completely changed my life. But I didn't know any of that when I first walked through the front door. Back then, I was broke. Not movie-level broke, not I have $3 to my name broke, but close. I was working construction jobs whenever I could get them, living in a tiny apartment and carrying around a credit card balance that seemed to grow no matter how hard I worked. Then my grandfather died. His name was Robert Harrison. He wasn't rich, at least that's what everybody in my family believed. He lived alone in the same old house for almost 40 years. He drove the same pickup truck, he wore the same faded jeans, and every Thanksgiving he'd complain about the price of eggs like the economy was personally attacking him. Nobody would have guessed he had anything valuable. After the funeral, the lawyer called me. He told me my grandfather had left me the house. I honestly thought he was joking. Me? Yes. The entire house? The house and the surrounding property. I didn't even know what to say. My mother had expected the property to be sold. My uncles wanted to split whatever money came from it. But apparently, my grandfather had written something very specific into his will. The house went to me. Only me. There was one condition. I couldn't sell it for 1 year. At first, I thought that was strange. Then I figured, whatever, I'd live there for a year, fix it up, sell it, and finally get myself out of debt. Easy. At least, that's what I thought. The house was about an hour outside the city. It sat on nearly 6 acres of land, surrounded by trees. The place was old, really old. The roof needed work. The kitchen looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The wallpaper was peeling, and the basement smelled like wet cardboard. But structurally, the house was solid. I spent the first few days cleaning. There were boxes everywhere, old newspapers, clothes, tools, Christmas decorations, photographs. My grandfather had never been the kind of guy who threw anything away. If a toaster broke in 1989, he probably kept it because, in his words, you never know. So I expected to find a lot of junk, and I did. But on my third day there, I found something that wasn't junk. I was cleaning out the upstairs hallway when I noticed a strange mark on the wall. It looked like the outline of a door that had been painted over. I ran my fingers across it. There was definitely something underneath. I grabbed a utility knife and carefully cut through the wallpaper. A wooden door appeared, but there was no handle, no lock, just a solid wooden panel. I tried pushing it. Nothing. I knocked. The sound was different, hollow. There was a room behind it. I spent the next hour trying to figure out how to open it. Finally, I noticed a small brass screw hidden underneath the trim. I unscrewed it. A tiny metal lever popped out. I pulled it. Click. The door opened. The room was completely dark. I turned on my flashlight. Dust covered everything. There was an old desk, a bookshelf, a wooden chair, and dozens of boxes stacked against the walls. It looked like my grandfather had been using the room as some kind of private office. I stepped inside. Then I saw the photograph. It was sitting on the desk. I picked it up. At first, I thought it was a picture of my grandfather as a child, but then I looked closer. It wasn't him. It was me. I knew it was impossible. But there I was, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing in front of the same house, wearing a blue jacket I actually remember owning. I flipped the photograph over. There was a date written on the back, March 14th, 1987. I did the math in my head. I was born in 1999. I dropped the photograph. It landed face up on the floor. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I heard something, a soft sound behind me. Click. I turned around. The door had closed. I walked toward it, tried the handle. Nothing. Locked. I pulled harder. Still nothing. I started laughing nervously. Okay, Grandpa, very funny. I looked around for another way out. That's when I noticed the bookshelf. One book was sticking out farther than the others. I pulled it. The entire bookshelf moved. Behind it was a narrow opening, a passage. I stared into the darkness. There were stairs going down, not up, down, under the house. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. At the bottom of the stairs was another door, and on that door, written in black marker, were 4 words, "Don't tell your mother." I froze. My grandfather had been dead for 3 days, and somehow I was standing inside a secret room he'd hidden from my entire family, a room containing a photograph of me that shouldn't exist, and a staircase leading somewhere underneath the house. I called my mother. She answered almost immediately. "Did you find anything useful in the house?" I looked at the photograph still lying on the floor, then at the hidden passage. I wanted to ask her about it. I wanted to ask her why my grandfather had written her name on the door, but something stopped me. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the fact that for the first time in my life, I realized my grandfather might have been hiding an entire life from us. So I lied. "Nah, just old junk," I said. My mother sighed. "Good. Don't spend too much money fixing the place." "Yeah. Are you sure you're okay?" I looked at the secret doorway. "Yeah, Mom." Another lie. I hung up. Then I picked up the photograph. I looked at the little boy again. There was something written underneath the picture. I had noticed it before. 4 words. "He will find this." I stared at the sentence. Then I looked down the stairs. Whatever my grandfather had hidden underneath that house, he expected me to find it, and somehow he had been preparing for that moment long before I was even born. I stood there for probably a full minute, staring down those stairs. Every reasonable part of my brain was telling me to stop. Call the police, call my mother, call the lawyer, call literally anybody. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight from the desk and started walking down. The stairs were narrow. Old wooden steps creaked underneath my weight, and every sound echoed through the walls. About halfway down, I noticed something scratched into the wall. A date, 1987. The same year written on the back of the photograph. I touched the numbers with my fingers. My grandfather had been down here. A lot. At the bottom of the stairs was a small concrete hallway. There were pipes running along the ceiling and exposed electrical wires hanging from the walls. It didn't look like something built into the house. It looked older, much older. At the end of the hallway was another door. This one was metal. There was a small combination lock attached to it. I tried random numbers. Nothing. Then I remembered the photograph. March 14th, 1987. I entered 031487. The lock clicked. I stared at it. "You're kidding me." I opened the door, and what I saw on the other side completely changed the way I looked at my grandfather. It was an underground office, not some little storage room, an actual office. There was a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a telephone, a wall covered with maps, and a giant wooden table in the middle of the room. On that table were dozens of folders, all neatly organized. I walked toward the desk. There was a nameplate sitting on it. Robert Harrison, my grandfather. I pulled out the chair and sat down. For a moment, I just stared at everything. My grandfather had never told me about this. He'd never told anyone. I opened the first drawer. Nothing but old pens and batteries. Second drawer, receipts. Third drawer, a stack of envelopes. Every envelope had a date, 1987, 1988, 1989, 1990. I opened the oldest one. Inside was a handwritten letter. I recognized my grandfather's handwriting immediately. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone." I stopped. I kept reading. "And if you're the person I think you are, then you've already found the room." I looked around. My hands were shaking. The letter continued. "There are things your mother doesn't know. There are things nobody in this family knows. I kept them hidden because I believed that was the only way to protect you." I swallowed. Protect me from what? I kept reading. "Before you open the next drawer, understand this. Everything in this room is connected to the property." I looked at the desk.
There were 4 drawers. I'd already opened 3. The 4th one had a small brass lock. I found the key taped underneath the desk. I unlocked it. Inside was a black notebook. The cover had no writing. I opened it. The first page contained a list of addresses, dozens of them. I recognized some: a grocery store, an apartment complex, a gas station, an old factory. Then I saw something strange. Next to each address was a number. At first, I thought they were prices. Then I realized they were dates. I flipped through more pages. There were hundreds of entries, properties, companies, names, and every few pages there were notes about underground tunnels. I sat back. What the hell were you doing, Grandpa? Then I found the first photograph. It showed my grandfather standing beside 3 other men. They were standing beside a construction site. Behind them was a sign, Harrison Development Group. I had never heard of it. I searched the company name on my phone. Nothing. No website, no records, no articles. It was like the company had never existed. I opened another folder. This one contained property documents. One address appeared over and over, a large piece of land about 20 miles from the house. The documents showed my grandfather had purchased it in 1987, but he'd never built anything there, at least nothing officially. I found an old map. There was a small red circle drawn on it. Underneath it, my grandfather had written, "Entrance number 3. I stared at the words. Entrance to what? I kept searching. Then I found another note. The first 2 entrances were compromised. My stomach tightened. This wasn't some weird hobby. My grandfather had been hiding something big. I pulled out my phone and called Mike. He was my best friend and probably the only person I trusted enough to tell. He answered. "What's up?" "I found something in my grandfather's house." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet." "That sounds reassuring." "I found a secret room." There was silence. Then, "You're serious?" "Yeah." "And?" "And there's an underground office." Another silence. "Okay," he said. "I'm coming over." He arrived 40 minutes later. I took him upstairs. He stood inside the secret room, staring at the hidden staircase. "Dude." "I know." "You've been here 3 days?" "Yep." "And you've already found a secret underground bunker?" "I wouldn't call it a bunker." He looked at the metal door. "That's literally a bunker." We went downstairs together. Mike spent about 5 minutes looking through the documents. Then he found something. "Wait." "What?" He held up a folder. "Look at this." It was a property deed. The land had originally belonged to a company called Harrison Mining and Development. Mike searched the company on his phone. His expression changed. "What?" He turned the phone toward me. There was one old newspaper article. The headline read, "Local Company Abandons Major Development Project After Mysterious Discovery." I read the article. It was dated 1988. According to the story, Harrison Mining and Development had purchased several hundred acres of land outside the city. Workers had discovered an underground structure while surveying the property. The company immediately stopped construction. The project was abandoned. No explanation was ever given. I looked at Mike. "That's the land from the map." He nodded. "Yep." I kept reading. The final paragraph was strange. It said the company had permanently sealed the area. But underneath the article, my grandfather had written, "We never sealed it." I stared at those words. Then I noticed something else. The article included an old photograph. A group of workers standing around a large hole in the ground. Behind them was a metal door, the exact same type of door I'd just opened underneath my house. Mike looked at me. "You need to go there." "I know. But before we do," he pointed to another document. It was a list of names. Some were crossed out. Some had dates beside them. At the bottom was a name that wasn't crossed out. Robert Harrison, my grandfather. And underneath his name was a note, "Final Custodian." I didn't know what that meant. But then I remembered the photograph of me as a child, the impossible photograph. I pulled it out of my pocket. Mike looked at it. Wait, what? He pointed to the background. I had been so focused on the child that I hadn't noticed the building behind me. It wasn't my grandfather's house. It was a large stone building, and above the entrance was a symbol, a circle with a line through it. The same symbol was drawn on my grandfather's map. Mike zoomed in on the photograph. That's not your grandfather's property. No. Then where was this taken? I turned the photograph over. The date was still there, March 14th, 1987. But underneath the date was something I'd completely missed, a tiny handwritten address. I typed it into Google Maps. The location appeared. I stared at the screen. My heart started pounding. The address was the same piece of land my grandfather had purchased in 1987, the place where the mysterious underground structure was supposedly discovered. Mike looked at me. So that's where the picture was taken. I nodded. But there's something we haven't figured out. What? I pointed to the little boy in the photograph. Why was I there? Mike didn't answer. Neither of us knew. But as I turned the photograph over again, something slipped out from behind it, a tiny folded piece of paper. I opened it. There were only 3 words. He wasn't alone. I looked at Mike. He looked at me. And for the first time, I started wondering whether the photograph wasn't proof that my grandfather had somehow predicted my future, but proof that someone had been watching my family for decades.
I read those 3 words over and over. He wasn't alone. For some reason, that sentence bothered me more than anything else we'd found. If the photograph was really taken in 1987, then I obviously wasn't the kid in it. But I knew that face. I knew the jacket. I even remembered the scar above the eyebrow. It was me. At least, it looked exactly like me. Mike stared at the photograph. There's no way. That's what I've been saying. You were born in '99. I know. So either this picture is fake, or someone wanted you to think it was real. I looked at him. Why would somebody do that? Mike shrugged. That's what we're gonna find out. The next morning, we drove to the property. It took almost an hour. The road got narrower and rougher the farther we went. Eventually, the pavement disappeared completely. Trees surrounded us on both sides. There were no houses, no businesses. Nothing, just hundreds of acres of forest. My grandfather had apparently owned this land for almost 40 years, and somehow nobody in my family had ever mentioned it. We parked near an old metal gate. The gate was covered in rust. A faded sign hung from it. Private property. No trespassing. Mike looked at me. You sure we should be here? It's my property. Fair enough. We climbed over the gate. I pulled up the old map on my phone. The red circle was somewhere deeper in the woods. We followed an overgrown dirt road. After about 20 minutes, we found something. A concrete foundation. It was almost completely covered by vines and moss. Mike walked around it. There's nothing here. I looked at the photograph. The building in the picture had stone walls, a large entrance, and a strange symbol above the door. I compared it with the foundation. It was the same shape. This is it. Mike looked around. Where's the building? I pointed down, underground. We started searching. There were no obvious doors, no stairs, nothing. Then, Mike kicked a piece of loose dirt. His boot hit metal. Clang. We both froze. He moved the dirt away. There was a steel hatch. I grabbed the handle. It wouldn't move. Mike helped me. Together, we pulled. The hatch opened with a loud metallic groan. A staircase disappeared into darkness. I looked at Mike. Here we go again, he sighed. I really hate your grandfather. We climbed down. The air was cold. Much colder than the tunnel underneath my house. At the bottom was a corridor. The walls were made of stone, old stone, probably over 100 years old. We walked slowly. Every few feet there was another doorway. Most were empty. Some had shelves. One contained rusted tools. Another had dozens of old glass bottles. Then we found a room with a large metal table. On the wall was the same symbol from the photograph, a circle, a line through the middle, and underneath it,
2 words, Harrison Archive. I looked at Mike. Archive? He nodded. This isn't a bunker. No, it's a storage facility. We searched the room. Most of the shelves were empty, but at the very back was a wooden cabinet. Inside were old files. I pulled out the first one, 1985. Another, 1986. Another, 1987. I opened the 1987 file. The first document was a photograph. I almost dropped it. It was the same picture, the photograph of me, except this time I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was another person standing behind me, a man. His face was partially hidden by a tree. I zoomed in. Mike leaned over my shoulder. Who's that? I don't know. I looked through the rest of the file. There were more photographs, dozens of them, all taken around the same date, and in every single one, I was there. Different locations, different clothes, same face, same little scar, same impossible kid. My hands started shaking. This isn't possible. Mike didn't answer. He was looking at another photograph. He turned it around. There was writing on the back. Subject successfully relocated. I stared at the words. Subject? Mike looked at me. That's what they called you. I felt sick. I grabbed another document. It was a medical report. I read the first line. Patient, unknown male child, age 6, date March 14th, 1987. I couldn't breathe. The report described a physical examination, height, weight, blood type, scars, everything, and at the bottom was a note, memory suppression successful. I looked up. Mike, he was already pale. What? I think somebody did something to me. We both stood there in silence. I kept reading. The next page had a signature, Dr. Alan Whitmore. Underneath it was the name of a company, Harrison Biomedical Research. I searched the company. Nothing. But then I searched the doctor's name. There was an old newspaper article. A researcher named Alan Whitmore had disappeared in 1991. He had been working on experimental neurological treatments. The article said his research facility had been shut down after an investigation, but the article didn't explain why. I looked at the documents again. My grandfather had been involved. I knew it. But why? And why had I been brought here? Then Mike found something else, a cassette tape. It was labeled, Michael, play only if Robert is dead. My name. Again. We found an old cassette player in the room. Mike inserted the tape. There was static. Then, my grandfather's voice, older, tired, but unmistakable. Michael, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. I closed my eyes. His voice continued. I need you to understand something before you continue. There was a long pause. You were never born into this family. My entire body went cold. Mike stared at me. What? My grandfather continued. You were brought to us. I couldn't move. Your real parents died when you were very young. Your father was involved with the North Star Project. He discovered what the others were doing and tried to expose them. The tape crackled. He failed. I felt like I was going to throw up. My father? I stopped. I didn't even know what to say. The recording continued. I took you because I promised your father I would protect you. Then came the sentence that changed everything. You are not Michael Harrison. I looked at Mike. He looked just as shocked as I was. My grandfather's voice continued. Your real name is Michael Carter. The room went completely silent. Carter, the same name I'd seen everywhere. The same family connected to North Star. The same family I thought my grandfather had been fighting against. I rewound the tape. Played it again. Your real name is Michael Carter. Mike sat down. Dude, I couldn't answer. Then the tape continued. There is one thing I never told you. My grandfather's voice became quieter. The North Star fortune wasn't created by us. A pause. It was stolen. I looked at the shelves around me. All those documents, all those secrets. My entire life suddenly felt like a lie. My grandfather had taken me, changed my identity, raised me as his grandson, and hidden me from my real family. Then came the final words on the tape. If the Carters ever find you. The recording stopped. The tape had ended. I sat there staring at the cassette player. Mike finally spoke. What do we do now? I looked at the photograph of myself from 1987, then at the files, then at the dark corridor outside. We find out what North Star really was. We started searching through the archive. Hours passed. Then, hidden inside a false bottom drawer, we found a folder with a single word on the cover, Origin. Inside was a photograph of 2 men. One was my grandfather. The other was a man I'd never seen before, except
I recognized his face. He was the man standing behind me in the 1987 photograph, and underneath the photograph was a note: Michael's father is still alive. I stared at the sentence. My father was alive. After 31 years of believing he was dead, my father might still be alive. And if that wasn't crazy enough, there was an address written beneath the note, a motel less than 2 hours away. I looked at Mike. "We're going." He nodded, but neither of us noticed the small red light blinking in the corner of the room. A security camera. Someone had been watching us the entire time, and whoever was behind that camera had just seen us discover the truth.
We left the archive as fast as we could. I didn't even bother closing the hatch behind us. I just wanted out. My head was spinning. My grandfather had lied to me. My entire identity was a lie. And somewhere less than 2 hours away was a man I had spent my entire life believing was dead. My father. At least, that's what the note said. Mike drove. I sat in the passenger seat, holding the folder against my chest. For the first 30 minutes, neither of us said much. Finally, Mike looked over. "You okay?" "No." "Fair." I stared out the window. How do you even process something like this? You don't. What? You just keep moving until it starts making sense. I laughed quietly. That's terrible advice. Yeah, but it's all I've got. We drove another hour. The address on the paper belonged to a small roadside motel outside a town I'd never heard of. It looked like the kind of place where the ice machine probably hadn't worked since 2004. We parked outside. I looked at the room number written on the note. Room 16. My hands were shaking. Mike noticed. "You want me to go first?" I shook my head. No. I got out of the car. We walked toward the room. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then I heard movement. Slow footsteps. The lock clicked. The door opened about 2 inches. A man's voice came from inside. "Who's asking?" I swallowed. "My name is Michael Harrison." Silence. Then the door opened, and I saw him. He was older than I expected, maybe late 50s. Great hair, thin face, tired eyes. But there was something about him that immediately felt familiar. Not because I'd seen him before, because I recognized myself in him. Same eyes, same crooked smile, same scar above the eyebrow. He stared at me. I stared at him. Neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "Michael?" I nodded. His face collapsed. He grabbed the doorframe to keep himself standing. Oh my God. Mike quietly stepped backward. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing that came to mind. "Are you my father?" The man closed his eyes. Yes. That single word hit me harder than I expected. I had imagined this moment thousands of times when I was a kid. Usually it involved some dramatic reunion, a hug, tears, answers. Instead, I just stood there, angry, confused, scared. He opened the door wider. "Come inside." We entered the motel room. It was small, 1 bed, a table, 2 chairs, a cheap television, and stacks of papers everywhere. My father sat down. I stayed standing. "Why did everyone tell me you were dead?" He looked at me. "Because I was supposed to be." "What does that mean?" He rubbed his face. "I was involved with North Star." "I know." He froze. "How much do you know?" "Enough to know that my grandfather stole me from you." He looked down. "He didn't steal you." "What?" "He saved you." I laughed bitterly. "That's what he told himself?" "No." My father looked directly at me. "That's what happened." He explained that my biological parents had discovered something while working with North Star. The project wasn't just about real estate. The tunnels weren't the most valuable thing. They were a way of hiding something much bigger. Money, companies, property, and a massive network of secret investments. But the real secret was the original source of the fortune. My father pulled out an old folder. Inside was a photograph. It showed a group of businessmen standing beside an old mine. "North Star started here," he said.
He pointed to the mine. Your great-grandfather found records showing that this entire region sat on valuable mineral deposits. I looked at the photograph. So they got rich from mining? Not exactly. He pulled out another document, a geological survey. There were large red markings beneath the land. What is that? Rare earth deposits. I frowned. How valuable? He laughed without humor. Back then, almost nobody cared. And today? He looked at me. Billions. My stomach dropped. The land my grandfather had owned, the property with the tunnels, the abandoned mine. It was all connected. But then my father said something that made it even crazier. Your grandfather knew the deposits would eventually become extremely valuable. So he bought the land? Yes. Then what happened? He leaned back. Because someone else owned the rights. I looked at him. Who? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened another folder. Inside were legal documents. The name at the top was Carter Mineral Holdings. My family. Or rather, my real family. I looked at my father. Your family owned the rights? He nodded. For decades. Then what happened? He leaned back. Your grandfather discovered the records and tried to take control. I felt anger rising. So he kidnapped me because of money? No. My father shook his head. He took you because people were coming after us. Who? He looked toward the motel window. That same people who are probably coming after you now. A car drove slowly past the motel. My father watched it. Then he stood. We need to leave. What? Now. Mike finally spoke. Why? My father pointed outside. Because that car has passed this motel 3 times. I looked through the curtain. A black SUV was parked across the street. My stomach dropped. That's the same kind of SUV from my grandfather's property. My father nodded. Exactly. He grabbed a small bag. What about the documents? I've got the important ones. Where are we going? Back to your grandfather's house. Why? Because the answers aren't in the archive. He looked at me. They're underneath your house. We left through the back door. My father drove an old pickup truck. Mike followed behind us. The entire drive back, I kept asking questions. My father answered as many as he could. He told me that my biological mother had died years ago. He told me he'd gone into hiding after discovering the truth about North Star. He told me my grandfather had taken me when I was 6. And he told me there was one reason nobody had ever found me. My grandfather had changed my identity. Michael Carter became Michael Harrison. New birth records, new school records, everything. But there was still one thing I didn't understand. Why did my grandfather leave me the house? My father didn't answer immediately. Then he said, the house wasn't really a house. What do you mean? It's the entrance. To what? The original North Star vault. I felt a chill. The vault from the documents? Yes. Where is it? Under your basement. I thought about the secret room, the tunnel, the locked doors, everything we'd already found. But I've been under the house. Not far enough. We reached my property just after midnight. The house looked completely dark. Too dark. I pulled into the driveway. My father got out first. He looked at the house. Then he stopped. What? He pointed toward the upstairs window. There was a light on. I knew I'd turned every light off before leaving. Mike pulled up behind us. We stared at the house. Then the front door opened. A man stepped outside. He wasn't holding a weapon. He wasn't wearing a mask. He simply stood there, waiting. My father whispered, Daniel Carter. I looked at him. The man from the warehouse? He nodded. Daniel raised his hand. He was holding something. A photograph. He shouted across the yard, Michael! I didn't move. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Your grandfather didn't tell you the most important part. He held up the photograph. It was another picture of me as a child, but this one was different. There was a woman standing beside me, my mother, and beside her was Daniel Carter.
My father saw the photograph. His face collapsed. "That's impossible." Daniel smiled. Then he said, "Your mother didn't die." "What?" Daniel slowly lowered the photograph. "She's been alive this entire time." And before I could even process those words, the basement door behind us opened. Someone was standing inside my house, and they were waiting for me.
I couldn't move. My mother was alive. For 31 years, I'd believed she was dead. Now Daniel Carter was standing in my driveway telling me she'd been alive the entire time, and someone was standing inside my house. My father grabbed my arm. "Don't go inside." I looked at him. "That's my house." "I know, but somebody's waiting for you." Daniel slowly walked toward us. "Michael, you deserve the truth." I stared at him. "Then tell me where my mother is." He smiled. "She's closer than you think." Before I could answer, the person inside the house stepped into the doorway. It was a woman, older, gray hair, but I recognized her face immediately. I had seen it in old photographs. My mother. I stopped breathing. She looked at me for several seconds. Then she whispered, "Michael." I didn't even realize I was moving until I was halfway across the yard. My father shouted something behind me, but I ignored him. I stopped a few feet from her. "You're alive." She nodded. Tears were running down her face. "I never wanted you to find out like this." I couldn't speak. All those years, every birthday, every Christmas, every time I'd wondered what she would have been like, she had been alive, and she'd been watching from a distance. I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Why?" She looked at Daniel, then at my father. "Because North Star wasn't what your grandfather told you." She opened the basement door wider. "Come inside." We entered the house. The basement looked exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. A section of the floor had been removed. There was a staircase underneath. My mother pointed toward it. "Your grandfather never found the real vault." I looked at her. "Then what did he find?" "A decoy." We climbed down. The tunnel underneath the house was completely different from the one I'd discovered before. This one was huge. Concrete walls, old electrical lights, metal doors. It looked like an underground facility. At the end was a massive steel door. My mother stopped. "This is where my father and I found North Star." I looked at the door. "What's inside?" She shook her head. "We never opened it." "Why?" "Because your grandfather told us not to." I stared at her. "My grandfather knew about this?" "Yes." Then she handed me a small metal key. "He left this for you." I looked at the key. "Why didn't he open it himself?" My mother gave me a sad smile. "Because he was afraid of what you'd find." I inserted the key. The lock turned. The steel door slowly opened. Inside was a massive underground chamber, but there was no gold, no money, no diamonds. Instead, there were hundreds of metal containers. Each one had a name written on it. Companies, banks, properties, investments. I opened one. Inside were stock certificates. Another contained property deeds. Another contained documents from foreign companies. Mike looked at the papers. "How much is all this worth?" My father answered quietly, "More than anyone realizes." I found a large black box sitting in the center of the room. There was a label on it, North Star, Final Asset Record. I opened it. Inside was a single document. It listed the total value of the original North Star holdings. I read the number. Then I read it again. My heart started pounding. It wasn't millions. It wasn't even tens of millions. The assets were worth more than $80 million. I looked at my family. "So this is what everyone was fighting over?" My mother shook her head. "No." She pointed toward the back wall. "That's only the beginning." There was another door. Behind it was a room filled with geological maps. My father walked inside. He pointed to one enormous map. "The real fortune isn't here." I looked at the map. It showed the land surrounding my grandfather's property. Red markings covered the entire area.
"What are those?" He looked at me. "Rare earth deposits." I remembered the conversation in the motel. "How much?" My father took a breath. "Potentially billions." I stared at the map. The house I'd inherited wasn't sitting on a worthless piece of land. It was sitting on top of something potentially worth a fortune. Then I noticed a final document on the table. It had my name on it. Michael Carter, final beneficiary. I opened it. The first sentence made my blood run cold. The rightful heir must choose whether North Star continues. I looked at my mother. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer. Then we heard a noise behind us. The steel door slammed shut. Boom! Everyone turned. The lights went out. For a few seconds there was complete darkness. Then a red emergency light came on. And from somewhere in the tunnel, we heard footsteps. Someone else had entered the vault. My father whispered, "Nobody was supposed to know about this place." Then a man's voice echoed through the darkness. "That's where you're wrong." I knew that voice, Daniel Carter, and this time he wasn't alone.
I couldn't move. My mother was alive. For 31 years, I'd believed she was dead. Now Daniel Carter was standing in my driveway telling me she'd been alive the entire time, and someone was standing inside my house. My father grabbed my arm. "Don't go inside." I looked at him. "That's my house." "I know, but somebody's waiting for you." Daniel slowly walked toward us. "Michael, you deserve the truth." I stared at him. "Then tell me where my mother is." He smiled. "She's closer than you think." Before I could answer, the person inside the house stepped into the doorway. It was a woman, older, gray hair, but I recognized her face immediately. I had seen it in old photographs. My mother. I stopped breathing. She looked at me for several seconds. Then she whispered, "Michael." I didn't even realize I was moving until I was halfway across the yard. My father shouted something behind me, but I ignored him. I stopped a few feet from her. "You're alive." She nodded. Tears were running down her face. "I never wanted you to find out like this." I couldn't speak. All those years, every birthday, every Christmas, every time I'd wondered what she would have been like, she had been alive, and she'd been watching from a distance. I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Why?" She looked at Daniel, then at my father. "Because North Star wasn't what your grandfather told you." She opened the basement door wider. "Come inside." We entered the house. The basement looked exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. A section of the floor had been removed. There was a staircase underneath. My mother pointed toward it. "Your grandfather never found the real vault." I looked at her. "Then what did he find?" "A decoy." We climbed down. The tunnel underneath the house was completely different from the one I'd discovered before. This one was huge. Concrete walls, old electrical lights, metal doors. It looked like an underground facility. At the end was a massive steel door. My mother stopped. "This is where my father and I found North Star." I looked at the door. "What's inside?" She shook her head. "We never opened it." "Why?" "Because your grandfather told us not to." I stared at her. "My grandfather knew about this?" "Yes." Then she handed me a small metal key. "He left this for you." I looked at the key. "Why didn't he open it himself?" My mother gave me a sad smile. "Because he was afraid of what you'd find." I inserted the key. The lock turned. The steel door slowly opened. Inside was a massive underground chamber, but there was no gold, no money, no diamonds. Instead, there were hundreds of metal containers. Each one had a name written on it. Companies, banks, properties, investments. I opened one. Inside were stock certificates. Another contained property deeds. Another contained documents from foreign companies. Mike looked at the papers. "How much is all this worth?" My father answered quietly, "More than anyone realizes."
I found a large black box sitting in the center of the room. There was a label on it, North Star, Final Asset Record. I opened it. Inside was a single document. It listed the total value of the original North Star holdings. I read the number. Then I read it again. My heart started pounding. It wasn't millions. It wasn't even tens of millions. The assets were worth more than $80 million. I looked at my family. So this is what everyone was fighting over? My mother shook her head. No. She pointed toward the back wall. That's only the beginning. There was another door. Behind it was a room filled with geological maps. My father walked inside. He pointed to one enormous map. The real fortune isn't here. I looked at the map. It showed the land surrounding my grandfather's property. Red markings covered the entire area. What are those? He looked at me. Rare earth deposits. I remembered the conversation in the motel. How much? My father took a breath. Potentially billions. I stared at the map. The house I'd inherited wasn't sitting on a worthless piece of land. It was sitting on top of something potentially worth a fortune. Then I noticed a final document on the table. It had my name on it. Michael Carter, final beneficiary. I opened it. The first sentence made my blood run cold. The rightful heir must choose whether North Star continues. I looked at my mother. What does that mean? She didn't answer. Then we heard a noise behind us. The steel door slammed shut. Boom! Everyone turned. The lights went out. For a few seconds there was complete darkness. Then a red emergency light came on. And from somewhere in the tunnel, we heard footsteps. Someone else had entered the vault. My father whispered, nobody was supposed to know about this place. Then a man's voice echoed through the darkness. That's where you're wrong. I knew that voice, Daniel Carter, and this time he wasn't alone.
The police car stopped outside the house. Red and blue lights flashed across the windows. For a second, nobody moved. Then my father looked at me. Whatever happens, don't give them the USB. I held it tighter. What if Daniel tells them we broke in? He will. Mike looked at the approaching officers. So what's the plan? I looked at the house. Then I looked at my mother. For 31 years, I'd believed she was dead. My father had been a stranger. My grandfather had been the only family I knew. And now I finally understood why he left everything to me. He hadn't wanted me to inherit his fortune. He wanted me to inherit the truth. I walked toward the police. Daniel came out of the house behind them. He pointed at me. That's him. One of the officers stepped forward. Sir, we need you to come with us. I reached into my pocket. My mother grabbed my arm. Michael! I shook my head. It's okay. I pulled out my phone. Before you arrest me, there's something you need to see. I opened the video I'd recorded inside the vault. The documents, the contracts, Daniel demanding that I sign over the mineral rights. Everything. Daniel's face changed. Turn that off. I kept recording. The officer watched the video. Then another officer walked over. Daniel started shouting, "It's fake!" But I had something else. The USB. I handed it to the officer. This contains decades of financial records. Daniel stared at me. You have no idea what you're doing. I looked at him. Yeah, I do. The investigation lasted almost a year. It uncovered everything: the hidden companies, the illegal property transfers, the secret accounts, the North Star network, and the mineral deposits. The government eventually confirmed that the land contained massive amounts of rare earth minerals. The estimates were shocking, billions of dollars. But because of the legal mess surrounding the original property rights, I couldn't simply sell everything and walk away. So I did something my grandfather never expected. I hired the best lawyers I could find. I paid every legitimate claimant, returned properties that had been taken illegally, and I dissolved the companies connected to North Star. It cost me millions, but when everything was finally settled, I still had a fortune. The original trust gave me control over several properties, investments, and mineral rights.
After taxes, legal fees, settlements, and everything else, I ended up with roughly $47 million. Not bad for a house I inherited unexpectedly. But the money wasn't the part that changed me. It was what happened afterwards. I kept my grandfather's house. I renovated it completely, but I didn't destroy the tunnels. Instead, I turned part of the underground facility into a private archive. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence, it's all there. My mother's story, my father's story, my grandfather's secrets, North Star's history, everything. My mother stayed in my life. For the first time, we actually got to know each other. It wasn't easy. You can't erase 30 years with one conversation, but we tried. My father disappeared after the investigation. He told me he needed time. I still hear from him occasionally. And Daniel, he lost everything. The fortune he spent decades chasing was gone. The companies disappeared, the properties were returned, and the North Star name became nothing more than a strange chapter in local history. As for me, I still think about that photograph, the one that started everything. The picture of a little boy standing in front of a building in 1987. For years, I thought it was proof that my grandfather somehow knew the future. But eventually, I discovered the truth. The photograph wasn't taken in 1987. Not exactly. The date was real, but the photograph had been developed years later. My grandfather had altered the date on the back. He wanted me to believe something impossible. He wanted me to keep looking, because he knew I wouldn't stop until I found the truth. And that little boy, it really was me. I had been 6 years old. My grandfather had taken me to the property after rescuing me from the people who were hunting my parents. The memories were buried so deeply that I didn't remember, until I found the photographs, until I found the tape, until everything came back. Sometimes I still walk through that secret room upstairs. I sit at the old desk, I look at the photograph, and I think about the man who raised me. He wasn't perfect. He lied to me. He stole my identity. He kept enormous secrets. But when I finally understood why he did it, I realized something. He didn't spend his life protecting money. He spent his life protecting me. And somehow, after everything was over, I became richer than he ever was. Not because of the gold, not because of the companies, not even because of the billions hidden beneath the land. I became rich because I finally had the one thing I'd been missing my entire life, the truth about where I came from. Today, people ask me how I became a millionaire. They expect some business story. They expect stocks, real estate, crypto, a lucky investment. Usually, I just smile, because technically, they're all wrong. I didn't build a company. I didn't win the lottery. I didn't find a suitcase full of cash. I inherited an old house from a man I thought was just my grandfather. Then I opened a door he never wanted anyone else to find, and behind that door was a secret that had been waiting for me since before I was born. That's how I went from barely paying my bills to becoming worth nearly $47 million, all because I decided to see what was behind one locked door. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you never really know what you're inheriting. Sometimes it's a house, sometimes it's a fortune, and sometimes it's a secret someone spent their entire life trying to hide.